Hello, my name is Tawana Seets, and I am a Person County native my entire life. My family, my mother's side, they're also Person County Woodsdale people. I've loved my home. I'm one of those people that I went off to college and I came back, and I have been here, and I have made it my home, my career. I retired recently from Person County Schools. I had made almost 27 years of working here in Person County, and I'm very pleased to be here today to talk about my father, my family, my father, and his contributions to Person County, the civil rights movement, my mother, and my family. My father grew up in Humboldt, Tennessee, and right out, it was Gibson County. I have visited Humboldt before, and he was one of 9 siblings. I never heard stories. If you know my father and my mother, I came along later on in their life. My mother, I believe she was 40 when I was born, and my father was much, much older. I've heard stories from men like Mr. Daniels at the men's clothing store. They said that my father would walk around all proud because he was so proud because look at what he done. But he grew up in Humboldt, Tennessee, Gibson County. He had 9 brothers and sisters. I never heard stories about a grandfather, but I do know his name. His mother was a sharecropper with younger children. And the memory that I've heard him tell in speaking engagements, and he used to tell this story, was that they were sharecroppers, and they lived on a dirt road and had the house there, and they had 1 mule. And this is how I learned about how important a mule was at that time. It was your sustenance of keeping your transportation if you went somewhere, but it wasn't for that. It was farming. It was for breaking the ground for food. And a white man had walked down the road one day and looked at her mule and I guess had been eyeing the mule and told my grandmother that tomorrow he was going to come and take that mule. And my father always told this story about how his mother, with younger children in the house, stayed out on the porch that afternoon when she knew that he was going to be walking back the other way when he said he was going to come take it, and she had a shotgun with her, and that when the man arrived with all intentions of taking that mule, my daddy said that she pointed the gun and held her ground and said, "No, you are not going to take our mule." And remember, my father was born in 1909, 112 years ago. So I learned in an AIG workshop once in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, a wonderful Duke professor. He talked about that you carry a part of the generation ahead of you that you've been exposed to. So my mother and father were both alive during the Depression. So I carry some of those personality traits of save that money for a rainy day. If you have $20, act like you have 5. Those are some of the things. He was raised there. My aunts, and I love that we have first-generation college students now and second-generation college students. Always happy, but my family on both sides, more on my father's side, they were college educated people. They were in Tennessee. Daddy went to Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. He walked there when it became when he decided that it was time to go. He always tells the story about, and people older than me and that were close to father, he would talk about having only $18, and that when he got there, room and board was $8. His books, he had to pay $5 for his books, and what he had left over, that's what he had left over, and that he did. And it used to always make me laugh that they called it work study back then. And my daddy would say, and I had work study, Tawana. And then he would say that he got to town and he was there and that they picked up that he could play football because, you know, he was introducing and they let him play football for on the Tuskegee Institute team, and they called him Grasshopper. And if you know my father, he was, you know, one of those wiry, thin men. I would be like, Lord, he can pick up anything. But I remember him telling the stories and being a proud Tuskegee Institute graduate, because not only was it Booker T. Washington School, and remember HBCUs, when we have this pride, it's because that was our opportunity. You have gone from where you were not, it was against the law for you to be allowed to read, let alone you're going to go to North Carolina's training school for teachers, or North Carolina Technical Institute, Agriculture and Technical Institute, or Tuskegee. And he talked about, and this was always exciting to me, that George Washington Carver, my father was there. This is where George Washington Carver, they had made a plan. Everything was strategic and thought out, that former slaves that had the knowledge of working the land and doing a very good job of it, we had run the agricultural economy on our backs for years. George Washington Carver said, look, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's empower them with what they already know. And George Washington Carver was not about wealth. He was not about fame. He traveled. He said, I want to go out to the farmers. And that's where we get the extension agents. And that's how my father got to Roxborough. But I got to tell you some more things. The agricultural extension agents, it all started with George Washington Carver. So when, and it was because go out to them. And Daddy said that George Washington Carver was a resident on the campus, and that you knew that all the time that he had some massive project going or research going, and you know, it was gardens there. It was a full farming, full working college campus institute of agriculture. And he graduated in 1937. I did have uncles that were also college educated. They, on my daddy's side, and they were in Chicago. I had an aunt that was in Tennessee, and she had been an Alpha Kappa Alpha lady, and I remember her showing me her scrapbooks back then. Now remember, my father was the youngest child in the group of 9, so these people that I've also been exposed to were older than him. And you know, if some people call me old-fashioned, I've been influenced by people that grew up in a different time. I've always joked, I wish that I was back then, except for that Jim Crow lynching thing. But my father did marry someone before he met my mother, and that family was in New York City. And he came to Roxborough through William Tuck, all of these Aggies. Oh, I've skipped some things, I think. He went after leaving Tuskegee. You know, Aggie Pride people out there, Daddy went to A&T, because, you know, that college in Greensboro, that institute in Greensboro was right up there with Tuskegee. So he said, I'm going to head to A&T. And that's where he met William Tuck. And that's where he met other Roxborough friends. And you know how it is. And he started working because he had a degree from Tuskegee. And by this time, World War II has broken out. My mother is a college student at Fayetteville State at this time, and she's telling me about Cab Calloway and how the GIs would come through Fayetteville on their way out, or they would come back from Paris and bring chocolates and real silk hose back to the girls on campus. And while that was going on my mother's side, on my father's side, there had been the GI Bill of Rights passed, whereas if black men would enlist and join to fight Hitler and Mussolini and all the Japanese people that had just bombed Pearl Harbor during that time, if they would enlist, they would get the equivalent of a high school diploma through these institutions. And so my father was an instructor for GIs that were headed off to Normandy and all those different places. He received his master's from North Carolina A&T in 1955, and he had been working, like I had mentioned, A.W. Jones, William Tuck, other Aggie men. They encouraged him, and now he was hired as an extension agent here in Person County through his A&T buddies and the connections. And now he was also, when he got the master's, with it you have the master's in science. It's technology, it's STEM. So science, technology, engineering, and math. So he was doing that with agriculture. So he was able to teach science. And he was hired to work at Helena with Josiah Thomas as the principal. So I'm having those people in my life and educators. And at the same time, my father has come here. He is this new black man, standing tall, and he gets involved with the NAACP. He connects with Mr. Peace. Let me see, oh Lordy, I always say Major Short, Wallace Blackwell, Henry Ely. And all of these younger men seem to gravitate to my daddy. And I remember because Floyd McKissick was a young man, if you recognize these names, that sat on that deacon's bench in my father's office and would visit. And young men, older than me, but young men that were at the feet of daddy. I remember Mickey Michal I have one of his things, Mickey Michal running for Congress the first time, and he looked so much like my daddy, and everybody kept on saying he looked like my daddy that, to this day, I saw him when Kamala came to the church in Durham about 2 years ago. I saw him, and to this day, it's Uncle Michal. And he would have, I remember Francella Bumpus being a come and talk to my father. It was lots of younger adult men, and my father had the man cave, and I remember he had friends, and they would come together, and it was always about business. And you all, if you've gotten to know me, I'm all about service and education, and that's what it was all about. My mother wrote in the, and this is so poignant, my mother wrote in his obituary, my sister Sandra, when I called her immediately, she says, Tawana, go find Daddy's obituary. Mama wrote it, and she knew him best. And she wrote this part, Mr. Seets was the inspiration to many young people seeking guidance and involvement in the politics of Person County, and was known to be the pulse of any activity demanding the involvement of black citizens. He was also a charter member of the Person County Committee on the Affairs of Black Citizens. And I know I'm skipping around, but he came and he partnered with those people. And I was a child, and I remember Daddy running for offices and not being successful. And I would hear adults. I was raised where you didn't sit around in adult conversation, but so much was going on. And this house was booming with activity, and people calling, and daddy answering the call and being the voice. And I remember, and I'm going to mention this, Mr. Oakley from down near City Lake. When I first started teaching, I was very close with his daughter still, Joyce Oakley. White people from City Lake, we all know last names. And I remember that he told me, he says, Miss Seets, Tawana, I remember your father. He said, I didn't always agree with what he said, but I respected him for saying it. And I remember that man said that. And, I'm standing there looking at this great big man, and I'm like, what's he going to say about my daddy? And I took that as, that was wonderful. But I remember my daddy would run for office, and then he got very involved with politics. So it was so funny. This political season, I masked up and I came out. And I said, I'm going to work at the polls, because growing up underneath my dad and Mr. Blackwell and Mr. Lee and all of them, you couldn't be bashful. And any of my friends like Tina and Veronica, Rabina, you all know, they would put us off at the top of a neighborhood with flyers and register to vote flyers. And we're little kids and we're ringing doorbells and saying hello and giving them the information. I have been campaigning, working the polls since I can remember. And I have a picture. I have a picture where he has me on the top of his station wagon. If you all know, he had that station wagon, all of them. For years, he was the man. You know, you have a car, men have cars, and women have cars they love, and they buy. My daddy loved a station wagon. And I don't know if these young people I don't know if you all remember, but he would put the speakers, because remember, he's an engineer. He would put the speakers and have a microphone, and he would ride through the neighborhoods, and he would say, get out to vote. We're voting this. And he would advertise through the neighborhood. And I'm going to tell you this. I never was embarrassed. I thought that's what you're supposed to do. I remember that he brought in with NAACP, and now this isn't him working alone. Reverend Palmer, Ava Lester, women, oh my goodness, Patty Harrison, I hate to mention names and don't get everybody. Pacolia Beatty. Reverend Reuben Blackwell. I grew up with the Blackwell boys, Jay and Reuben, through my parents' friendships with them, and they were my brothers. And the first thing Reuben said to me when I called him, when Michael asked me, Reuben said, Tawana, they want to talk about your daddy, but he came about, and they were in a time when there was always that vice president wife right there, always working. And he said, Tawana, remember, Coretta Scott King was right there with Martin Luther King, and you cannot tell the story of what was going on in Roxborough without mentioning or talking about including the women that were a part of it. So we are honoring my daddy, and those of you all that know my father, you know that Helen Seets, she was out there, she was a soldier. She was first a lieutenant, I guess I would try to say. But everything was strategized. My daddy had those midnight those meetings for NAACP that would last to midnight and nobody complained. And, what was I doing? My sister was off living college in her life. And so I was a little girl that was at NAACP meetings. So I knew a lot of strategies. This past election that people were so shocked that day when I was standing out there saying, don't split your vote. If they say vote for 5, pick your one candidate, vote for that one candidate. And people were so shocked because I was saying those things. But I learned those strategies about voting and campaigning and getting out to vote through my father. And I could call some more people out because there are many of us that their parents were working right alongside of my father, with my father, and you all know what to do too. We can get our voices heard and be an active part of our community. We can. My father brought in, when he was here, I have pictures also, he brought in a summer lunch program. And I remember it was he organized the transportation for the food to get here, the refrigeration, the places that were going to be delivered. We would be there, and all the kids from the neighborhood would come, from the different neighborhoods would come. And that was organized through the NAACP here in Person County. I remember being on a step team. We were the first, Reuben knows more about this, we were the first youth NAACP chapter in this area, and we were active. But talking about encouraging, he was a motivator. He was a soldier. I remember that he was doing it while he was working and didn't wait till it became comfortable and we're in retirement and the fight is not ugly. I'm getting ahead of myself, but I remember in the 70s, and I have some articles that talked about it, and one of biggest memories is that one day Daddy answered the phone. And yes, I've been where the phone has been harassing phone calls and them hiding me from that. But someone called and Reuben had been arrested. I was a young girl and it was unrest. I mean, I'm going to tell you, I've been saying this recently because my sister was alive. She was the last graduating high school class from the all-black high school where my church is located, First Baptist. And I always say that we talk about that war veterans, they don't talk about the trauma of what they experienced. They've closed the door and moved on because of what they've experienced. And over the past few weeks, getting my sister to tell me about things that I did not know, that I think also people that have lived through Jim Crow, that they have stories that they don't share with us. My sister told me, and my brother-in-law have told me that, and my mother used to always say things like, you know, when you were walking on the bus, the other buses would come by and spit at you when segregation was going on. I couldn't believe that Reuben, who was only about 10 years older than me, maybe a little bit older, he agreed with my sister, told me the part about, like, if you were walking down the road, maybe not my sister because you didn't let the girls have that much freedom because of the danger, but young men walking down the street, and if you saw a car coming and you knew it was a white person, that you would just jump over in the ditch to hide because you knew that they might swerve to hit you or they might decide to come back and take you away or something. And when my sister told me that story, when I was telling you earlier, like things that she has not told me before, and Reuben said, and he's 10 years younger than my sister, so he's the 70s experience in this, and he's saying the same thing. And the time that Reuben got arrested, Reuben was working at Collins and Aikman. He had graduated. Reuben told me that back when he was coming through Person Senior High School, that it was lots of racial strife, and there were fights. My principal, Mr. Knight, his son had gotten into a fight one morning at Person Senior High where a knife was involved. And it was all stemming from that, even though Reuben in this class, they were integrated starting back in first grade, these mindsets had still grown. And so by the time they got into high school, they were fighting and they were upsets. But we had a brand new Pizza Hut in town. Reuben is working at Collins and Aikman, and everybody's decided to go to Pizza Hut. Now, I was a child, so all of this is going on around me. Reuben is in the Pizza Hut, and he's sitting at the table in the middle of the room, and he is there with other classmates, and he's been accepted to the University of North Carolina, but it's summertime working before you go off. So he's sitting at the table with white girls at the table with him. And he's the black man, and there are other white boys. And the man that was fixing the pizzas in the back started slamming things around and started yelling the N-word, saying that he had to get out. And, you know, Reuben is this new thinker. He's being trained underneath my daddy. You know, he's like, what have I done wrong? The Pizza Hut man called the police. And, you know, let's just keep the peace. And he goes downtown. Well, they arrested Reuben. And somebody called the house, and I remember my father, because, you know, we had a house phone with the cord. I remember my father clear as day. He hung up the phone, and he said, Mama, get my checkbook. They've arrested Reuben. And I remember hearing that as a child, and it scaring me to death, that I didn't know what Reuben was arrested for, and I didn't know what that they would do to Reuben in jail. And I was a little girl, and I just knew that it was scary. And it was all about the man that was making pizza. Just was totally disgusted that Reuben was sitting at a table in the restaurant with people of a different race. And those are just stories that I remember being involved in. I remember Mother of the Year and Father of the Year fundraisers, and them raising money to do things, like I said, provide the county with whoever needs it, lunch. And I remember Mr. Ely downtown having a place for young people to dance, if you remember Rock City. I remember that Milton Rogers' mom, she and the other ladies got together and they started a step team here for us. Bridget Ramsey, I remember how excited we were. I remember Dorothy Pulliam, she started a swimming pool here, and that's where I learned how to swim. Ronnie Russell and Roxy Russell and Dorothy Pulliam taught us how to swim, me and the Thomas children. And Daddy was always about uplifting the race, and he made sure that I was sheltered from some of the bad, but he made sure that I had the confidence to know that if I worked hard, he says, Tawana, I know you. If you show up for class, you're going to make a C. Think about if you put some effort. And that is his philosophy with me, that I'm going to say this, my Person County home people, my daddy never intended me to move back to Roxborough, never. I moved back to Roxborough because my mother had strokes after my father died, and I wanted her to be able to stay at home. And I'm going to say this, and I've said this, thinking about scripture, I'm blessed every day by my parents, and they have been gone for a while now. Honor your mother and father. And now you're not honoring them just because you want something, but it is truth. Your life will be better. Your time on this earth will be longer. I don't know when my time is over, but every day, my mother and father affect me. So when my father came, my mother and my family, we're really Prospect Hill. We're Prospect Hill. That's the home church. Mama and, the family lives in Woodsdale. So that was the home church. My mother's people are buried in that cemetery. But my mother and father, since Mama was a young teacher, she lived in the boarding houses around like what is now First Baptist, those little bitty houses were the teachers' residence. You didn't, you lived on the campus back then. And my father came and he wanted to court my mother. Daddy was older than Mama. He came down here and scooped her up. He thought she looked like Lena Horne. And that was the cover. He didn't think she looked like Lena Horne. He thought that he had found a Lena Horne. But my grandfather down in Prospect Hill, Woodsdale, said, no. I've heard that man's been married before. And, Daddy's all spiffy. He's all spiffy coming into town from A&T, the same way we feel about spiffy folks when they come now. And my grandfather said that he had to prove to him that he was not married. And my father did. He showed him his divorce papers, and they attended Prospect Hill with the family. Still active family out there. But when Mama and Daddy decided to marry, they married 1951, I believe. Yep. And they moved to a house around the corner from this house we're at right now, and they lived there 1 year. And my sister was born after, 9 months to the time. And Mama and Daddy, this house had been built that we're in now, and this was 68 years ago. They moved from the White House around the corner. It's still standing, and they moved here, and that's where they have been. And First Baptist was right up the street where Hester Woodard and Day, and Mama said, we have made our community here. Let's be involved in the community here. I love my home church. But back then, Prospect Hill was only third Sunday. I don't know if it's that way. So they embraced First Baptist. You know how all our churches are sister churches anyway. I mean, I'm New Mount Zion. Oh, Lordy, Lawson Chapel. Oh, I love all our churches. Allen's. But, and so Mama and Daddy, Mama moved her membership to First Baptist, and Daddy, he participated. He became a layman's. We had a layman's league at First Baptist. He was a trustee, and I was raised by Daddy would say, if your mama's going to church, you're going to church. One time, my senior year, Laura Ann Kidd, a girlfriend of mine, asked me to go with her somewhere on a Sunday. I knew the answer was going to be no. I didn't even think to ask. But Laura Ann was pressuring me, and I asked, and Daddy said I could go somewhere on a Sunday, miss church. I was walking around the house thinking it was a joke. Like when Sunday came and Daddy was getting dressed, and I was like, he's really going to let me go? And that was, it was the expectations. I'm talking about raising children, and men, folks, help it. I know women, we might not, we can do it all. But I remember that my father would say, this is your mother's house. This is your mother's house. That's my wife. That's my wife. If she wants you to wash, scald, and dry and put away the dishes and all at once, because, I would say, why come I can't let them drain? And I would fuss, and Daddy would come right in, and he was mama's muscle, just in word, though, because he loved her. He loved her. My father passed on I want to say a Monday. We buried him on a Thursday, and my mother had her first stroke on a Saturday. And I know she had been his caregiver. He's a handful, been a handful forever. We also know my mother had bypass surgery years before, when you bypass. So we know that stroke comes from all of the cardiovascular. I always joke and say that my father had neck bone every meal. My mother always had a bowl of neck bone. That's how I know how to do a pressure cooker. But he ate that, and he smoked cigarettes. He did drink before I was born, and he lived to be 87. How does he eat pork, smoke cigarettes, and he lives to be 87? And strong as nails. But you know what it was, folks? It was those vegetables that he was eating. If you eat things grown in dirt, that's going to be a shout out to Nurse Wallace at Southern. She and my doctors have said, concentrate on always making sure you eat more things grown in dirt than not. During the summertime, we had vegetable gardens. And I've been raised as a teacher with teachers, and so summertime was vacation. But for us, summertime was working in the garden, selling vegetables, and I loved it. I used to love to walk behind him when he would dig the potatoes and turn the dirt up, and we would walk behind him and pick up the potatoes. I loved it. And now I'm talking about long rows, not just little raised garden people are doing now, But I loved it. I love eating watermelons. Like we had watermelons, strawberries, corn, things here. But then we had another garden out in Woodsdale, a big garden. And we had chickens here. I was raised with chickens. And remember, he's an agriculture teacher, so he did it. We have an irrigation system that I'm trying to correct, that I'm trying to get back working here, that he put in himself. He built furniture, anything that you do with hands and agriculture, he could do. Animals, he could do. We did not have the pigs here. My parents moved uptown because they were educators, and you're moving uptown like Jefferson's or whatever, but still kept the same family things going. He was a very active and well-known member of the community. He taught in the Person County school system, coached Little League sports. I have some pictures, I'm trying to find them, of his softball teams. And they used to tell me the story about how Daddy would haul people everywhere. They would get back from a game that their mama wouldn't have any ride to get them. And Daddy would already said, don't you worry about it. If you let them play, I will get them home. I will get them to the game. And I remember that my father never wanted me to drive an activity bus because I began coaching when I started teaching. I got the opportunity to coach cheerleading for 20 years, first at middle school and then at the high school. And I remember my father never wanted me to drive an activity bus. And some of you all out here, maybe you were some of those softball girls, but he was driving back one night and he was coming through Danville and he had a heart attack driving the bus. And my daddy always said, baby, I don't want you to have that much responsibility in your hands. He didn't want me to have those people's lives. And my father suffered a heart attack in his 50s, late 50s, and he came back and was a hard worker. Those of you all that know him, until he was 87 years old, tough as nails. Lord, when I'm calling all you 21st century patriarchs. It's in you. Be that. Be that. Now, ladies, I learned something through my daddy. I remember that he would not do, we were saying, Daddy, you need to go to the doctor. You need to go to the doctor. And he would not go to the doctor until Austin Lee, Ambrose Lee, and Wallace Blackwell came over here and got him to go get in the car. Men, folks, take care of your health. Okay, stop. You know I'm joking right there. But, you know, Daddy would not get in the car, y'all. When me, Mom, and my sister were saying, Daddy, it's time, he had pneumonia. He had pneumonia. And he was a smoker. But Daddy wasn't getting in the car. If the women folks were saying getting in the car, he won't go into no hospital. Who's going to take care of us? You all, then, after the pneumonia, my father loved fishing, loved boating, and he had a fishing boat. And we loved that fishing boat. I didn't know it wasn't fancy. I loved it. And my sister and my mother had talked to the doctor and said that Daddy didn't need to keep on going out there putting that boat in and out of that water. And my mama and my sister sold my daddy's boat, and this man came to our driveway and hooked the boat up. And I was out in the driveway because Daddy was in the house. Now, he's 80-something years old, but he's still Daddy. I was so nervous. I was like, he's going to come out here with a shotgun and see this man pulling off with his boat. I was so nervous. And I was looking. So let me tell you this story, Roxborough people. Daddy, you know how sometimes they get to driving and they'll drive down the middle lane going 55 and say it's their lane. Well, he had gotten that way. So Mom had gone up there, and it was Officer Reagan was the state trooper that had been at the state trooper's office. And Mama had talked to Officer Reagan and said, don't give Daddy his license. So for about a year or two, Daddy didn't have his license, and he was sitting down here calm, cool, collected. One day, I saw my father. Now, I'm in high school, I guess, by this time, and I see Daddy driving back down the road with the car. And I'm like, when did Daddy take the... And when he got out, Mama was fussing, saying, Herschel, you don't need to drive. You don't have a license. You know, Daddy didn't break the law, so that was working. And he came in the house and he threw the license down and he said, you didn't know Officer Reagan retired. He had gone up there. He had kept his eye on. He was like, y'all don't know that man's getting ready to retire and this new man's going to give me my license. And Daddy went to the new man, passed the test, passed it all, got his license back. So, and we didn't control Daddy. Daddy controlled us. Let me talk about income tax season. At one time, I don't know if this is true, but it felt like it. When income tax season came, I thought it was the best time in the world because every black family in Roxborough, I know not every, I'm exaggerating, they would come for my daddy to do his income tax. So that meant I had playmates the whole tax season because they bring their kids with them. And we look forward to it every year. And I remember when I was a little girl, you mamas will know this, I learned, me and my mother, we were his secretaries, his assistants. So I learned how to copy taxes. Daddy would write it down on one form, and then he had all the extras. It was a tax business in our house, and we would copy taxes. And then as I got older, I learned how to use the old calculator. And I would have to check back over his figures. So I can do taxes. He was active in the Jim Hunt campaign, Jimmy Carter. I said when it came time to say names, I would mess up. I remember that I was a Senate page, and it was because, just always giving opportunities. I remember the 4-H through Doris Blackwell and how much Mrs. Blackwell introduced, and that was all 4-H, agriculture. It was all through them pushing, saying that if we have a resource, let's utilize it. Don't just let it sit there, put it into action. And it was very organized. And it was just a time that I want us to get back to. Everybody was focused. And like, I hope that I've gotten, if you know me, it wasn't an us and them. I went with my daddy. I don't know if you all remember the tree up on the hill. I knew those people too. He would hire people to work for him down here, and he would do what he could to help folks. I remember at one time, like, they weren't treating our workers. Daddy had finally helped people to get the shift at our factories, not the night shift. And then they started putting in rules that were outrageous. No radio. If it snows, you can't even listen to WRXO to hear if your children are getting dismissed. This is before cell phones. And I remember little things that you might say are little things, but I remember several times, from what I can remembering I was a child, of him going and standing up for people and him speaking up for folks. And the phone constantly was ringing. And I don't ever remember him saying no. Now, of course, I did not hear everything that was said, and even one time when I was in college, when I was in college and in the 80s, and someone was on bad luck, and they were going around and they were asking all of my friends' parents for money. And by the time they got to my parents' home, word of mouth, we had talked. And my daddy was the one that said, no, we're going to get this person some help. It wasn't going to be another, oh, well, he's been by here, and then let's just keep on calling people, warning them. I remember it stopped, and we've all made mistakes. But we learn from them, and we try not to repeat them. My father was not perfect. I say a lot of times I am his child. I always pray that I can be as kind as my mama. I always say that mama taught kindergarten, first grade, and I taught middle school. And I'm my father's. I'm part of my father. We can be overbearing. But sometimes, overbearing has to be to get a change. And sometimes you can be the voice, and I think that was my daddy. He was the voice for people, and he wasn't afraid to speak up. But I teach my students now that when we're talking about civil rights, I have them define the word civil. Civil means people. When we're talking about civil rights, we're talking about people's rights. That's how my father raised me. He was a cheerleader. He never allowed me. I didn't even know that I wasn't allowed to go somewhere and I wasn't allowed to do something. Or we went to the restaurants. I remember Bob Witt's, and we went inside and we would sit and have dinner, and they pointed the back window to me and they would tell me the stories about that was the door or that was the window that they came to. And my father took me on we took vacations, and I remember that sometimes I would look and think that not everybody takes a vacation, or not everyone's been to the beach. One of the things that I've tried as an adult to do is that the wonderful things that I was blessed to experience, I've tried to make sure that children coming underneath me get to experience those things. I was on drill team and cheerleading growing up, and I remember how wonderful that experience was to be on these teams and dance teams. And when I decided to coach cheerleading here in Person County, it was because I wanted to make sure I wanted to try to give that experience to those girls, and not be biased, and not have that biasness that sometimes would be in positions of teams like that. And I want my students to be thinkers. I'm not following a party when I'm not following a political party when I want to help somebody. I always say that I'm concerned about our black children, but I'm also concerned about all children because we're the United States, unity, uno, one, come together. And I think that's what my father was saying, that we all can be equal out here. We all have a story. Some of the things that I've talked about today, it doesn't matter what race you are, you can relate and experience those things. He was a political person. He was a servant. I know people, a servant, there's, I always talk about having a servant's heart. And Jesus had a servant's heart. Remember that part about washing the feet of others? You think about it, that. We look at our pedicurists and think, ooh, would I want to do that all day? And he was a servant. And we all know that you are no stronger than your weakest link. And I've said many times to modern teachers that I work with that I don't want to put bars on my window. I don't want to have a stockade of guns in my home. I know some people love that hobby that they have. But if we don't help others, a hungry stomach will make people do a lot of bad things. And I know that we need to help. And this whole idea of thinking that everybody that needs help is somehow a bad person, that's not what my father showed me. I always say that he was so advanced. I remember he was into, and you all can look it up, my daddy had this organization that he was into called MUNTA. And he has a pen, and I didn't really understand it, but it was the United States of America inside of the shape of Africa. And it was called MUNTA. And I've tried to look it up, but I remember him saying that the United States, we're connected. We are connected. And, just being that far advanced. I remember I was in 4th grade in 1976, so you're getting my time frame. I was born in 1967. And I'm glad that I was raised by him. I remember a couple of years ago, I was on a tour of the county with new teachers, and someone got on the microphone. We were coming up past the hill, and my parents and Mr. Blackwell, Cornerstone Baptist Church is there now. Remember the old Sharps Funeral Home? At one time, my Bates service station was up there. It was a thriving area, and I remember my parents and the Blackwells and the Lees, they partnered together and they bought the property, and they were keeping it thriving and going and rental property. And I just remember things, just trying to keep our city thriving, trying to keep our people active. Those of you all that know me, I'm all into that. I want a sidewalk on our side of town where we have the largest walking community. I cringe when I see children walking on the side of the road headed to early interventions. That's the school of 4 and under. South Elementary, that starts from kindergarten to 5th grade. I know that these things are true because I've taught the middle school kids at Southern, and sometimes they'll be late because they had to make sure that their little brother and sister made it to school safely. We have the largest. I just worry that how can we expect improvement when we are still caught back in 1970 in Person County? And I know we've been told we have our pools, you get yours. Well, I'm a taxpayer. And if my voice thinks that that's what's necessary to uplift our children, you fuss about that they have nothing else to do, but we don't even have a basketball court that they're welcome to play. You heard what I said, welcomed to play. You cannot fool me about why we don't have a basketball court because I've been living here for a minute. I know. I'm continuing what my father showed me. I need others to join in with me. And when I know you're out there, Miriam Little, your mother and father, civil rights leaders. Paula Lee, your mother and father. Mrs. Lee is still with us. God bless her. Wendy Palmer. I love my Wendy. Goodness gracious. She's out there working. All of us are working. Every personality is different. Everybody can't be an HB Seets, but everybody can do something. I want us to get active. It's for the best. And it's not just for Black children. It's for all children. And I've been talking to young people, and we have had a buffer where we didn't have to fight every afternoon. And I know when people say, when we say the word privileged, and some people have come back to me and say, well, you're not struggling. Well, when one is struggling, we're all struggling. I think that that's what my father was about. He wanted to make a place. He was building like I've told you, he was building others to carry on and to not be afraid. And what are we trying to do? Pursuit of happiness. I remember that a lot of times people will do workshops. People that know me from the school system know I've gotten on this word sometimes when somebody doesn't know what the word culture, what it really means when they're talking about culture. Sometimes they're referring to hateful stereotypes. But one thing that I've noticed is that we're an American culture. If I say family reunion, everybody knows what I'm talking about. We're an American culture. We have to get that back. I went to a soca party, a day party, virtual soca party. That's Caribbean music, Southern Caribbean music. And when everybody says, wave your flags, I'm on this with people from all over, and all these people are waving their flags. I'm to the point that I've got my other computer up and I'm looking so I can know where everybody's from. And I love my country too, and I'm just as happy. But it breaks my heart that I look into the camera and I don't see our young people or our people waving our flag. I hate that. I feel that our flag has been moved to a bad symbol. We gotta get some pride going back. I don't want it to always be a 9/11. And then it brings us to reality. That God made us as a communal people. We're out here in this together.